Please understand that right at the outset, I want to make this known. When I talk about the Pakistanis, I refer to the Pakistani government, the ISI, their military, not the good people of Pakistan. We are cut from the same cloth. I refer to a dastardly regime that is going around and propagating terrorism for its own personal agendas. So it in no way is a malignment of the good people of Pakistan. Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to discuss the findings of a report that was issued by a Swiss think tank regarding Operation Sindoor. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the Center for Military History and Perspective Studies, or CHPM, released a report regarding what actually happened during Operation Sindoor and its impact. I'm going to briefly go through this report with you. I highly recommend you to go out and read it. It's a 47-page report. I'll provide the links for it in the description, and it makes for great reading, and also it helps one to understand what actually went down during Operation Sindoor, bar all the noise that came from the Pakistani side. The Center for Military History and Perspective Studies, or CHPM, was founded in 1969 at the initiative of Colonel Daniel Reichel. It has been seated within the Werther River Estate, former residence of General Henry Guisan, since 1971. I hope I'm not butchering those names. If I am, please forgive me. Now, page 5, under the heading Abstract, there's something worth noting here. For several decades, radical Islamist insurgent movements have been using Pakistan as a rear base to launch attacks against India, with the more or less implicit consent of the Pakistani military. Indian responses have become increasingly resolute, despite the risk posed by the relative uncertainty inherent to Pakistan's nuclear doctrine. So basically what it's saying is that for several decades, radical Islamist insurgent groups have been operating from Pakistani soil and using Pakistani soil for targeted attacks against India. Now, they are saying that this report is saying that this is with the implicit consent of the Pakistani military and state. They further say that Indian responses have become increasingly stronger regarding attacks emanating from Pakistan and from these militant Islamist insurgents. And this is despite Pakistan waving around its nuclear doctrine.
We in Pakistan will use the full spectrum of power, both conventional and nuclear. And I'll stop there.
And when a nuclear-armed country fights to the end, it will have consequences far beyond the borders. It will have consequences for the world, which is why I repeat I'm here. Because I'm warning you, it's not a threat.
Now you'll see why this is important when we get to the conclusion. So the report goes on to say that May 2025 was marked by even more intense and complex confrontations between the Indian and Pakistani air forces, which lasted 88 hours. The loss of at least one Indian Rafale fighter jet on the night of 7th May 2025 can be seen as the tip of the iceberg, as this event, above all, made a strong impression in the West and attracted significant media attention. However, this sequence saw a large-scale confrontation between two competent air forces equipped with small fleets of state-of-the-art aircraft designs, such as the J-10C and the Rafale, supported by substantial fleets of fourth-generation combat aircraft, as well as sophisticated integrated air defense networks and force multipliers. So the initial part of this is that the Pakistanis had taken down a Rafale jet, and that went on to basically cloud anything else that was happening during this 88 hours. The Pakistanis had dominated the social media, they had dominated the narrative by continuously harping on the takedown of this one single Rafale jet. However, as you will see, the actual scenario on the ground was far different. So much of the report goes on to talk about, Pakistan being an ally of the West, Pakistan also cozying up to the Chinese and gaining, military equipment not only from the West by way of F-16s, but also from China in terms of, their radar and missile detection systems, and the J-17 fighter jets, JC-17 I think it's called, fighter jets from the Chinese. It goes on to describe how Pakistan is currently involved in trying to modernize its defense capabilities and trying to invoke indigenous initiatives. However, it's not sustainable because Pakistan has to continuously go to other major powers like the Chinese and the West for the crucial elements that are required to get this initiative off the ground. On the 22nd of April 2025, a small group of militants belonging to the Resistance Front, as assessed by Indian intelligence services to be an offshoot of Lashkar-e-Taiba (LET), attacked a group of tourists in Pahalgam, a popular hill resort in Jammu and Kashmir. 25 Indian tourists and one Nepali national were killed in the attack. One of New Delhi's first responses was to suspend its participation in the Indus Waters Treaty, a move of crucial importance for Pakistan.
यहाँ पर थी, क्या बोलते भेलपुरी खाड़ी से मेरा पति साइड में था, एक इंसान है, उसने उसको गोली मार दी।
यहाँ पे
उसने बोला कि ये शायद मुस्लिम नहीं है, उसने उसको गोली मार दी।
नहीं आप टेंशन मत लो, अब बेटा आप यहाँ पे रहो, हम साथ में। मैडम ये जो भहीद साहब है प्रेसिडेंट, आप टेंशन मत लो,
मेरे पति को बचा लो,
हम बचा देगा, कोई बात नहीं। भाई तो करेंगे फोन दब से मन युवा डिजाइन क्या है। ठीक है हम बचा देंगे ना, आप टेंशन मत लो, मैं आ रहा हूँ। मैं कहाँ पे आपका ये हस्बैंड, क्या हुआ इसको, क्या हुआ?
Please ask for help. We don't need
Okay, don't worry. You okay? You need a water, sir?
Sir, we'll manage. Just ask for help. Please,
Okay, you first you give the hands water, drop of water, take a drop of water. हम आ रहे हैं, आप टेंशन, कोई बात नहीं, हम हैं, हम आ रहे हैं, आप टेंशन मत लो मैडम, हम आ रहे हैं। नहीं खुदाया, कहाँ पे आपका बेटा, कहाँ पे है? कोई बात नहीं, हम इनके साथ हैं, ये प्रेसिडेंट है वही साहब, ये यूनियन का प्रेसिडेंट है, ये साथ में, आपको कोई टेंशन नहीं। मैडम आप कोई टेंशन मत ले, हम साथ में। अरे मैडम ये प्रेसिडेंट साथ आया है, आपको किसी चीज का डरने का नहीं, हम साथ में, आपको किसी को क्या हुआ है?
Now we all remember those Pahalgam attacks, those dastardly Pahalgam attacks, where these insurgents had asked the victims to recite, the Islamic prayer, as well as asked the men to drop their pants in order to see if they were circumcised or not, thus knowing whether they are Muslim or Hindu. And once they found out that they were Hindu, they were basically executed in cold blood. There's even the one incident where I think it was the newlywed couple that was on honeymoon, and the husband had now been murdered by these assailants, and the wife said to the assailant, you've killed my husband, you might as well kill me. And he says to her, no, you need to go to Modi and tell him what we have done here, or something along those lines. So needless to say, those despicable monsters were subsequently neutralized by the Indian army. Their remains were on full view for everybody to see. You interfere, this is what will be the outcome. So it goes on to say that on the 23rd and 24th of April, the headquarters of India's three armed services, in coordination with various intelligence agencies, developed several distinct response scenarios targeting the infrastructure of Pakistan-based jihadist organizations involved in these attacks against India. Tactical planning began on the 29th of April with the selection of targets, 9 camps belonging to JEM, so that's Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba or LET, and the strike date being finalized on 5th May. So you find that the Indians had successfully neutralized the bases identified that belonged to Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. And basically, the Indian government said to the Pakistanis, we've carried out our attacks, our objectives have been met, and we don't want this to escalate any further. However, the ball is in your court. The Pakistani regime, being what it is, this cavalier Wild West cowboy regime with nuclear powers in the region, decided that they needed to escalate, because obviously under Shehbaz Sharif, who's just this little idiot being dangled on a string, and he's Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir, it was too much of a dent to their ego to allow this to happen. And rather than letting it just be, they decided to escalate. The report then goes to a detailed breakdown of what happened, culminating in an escalation where the Indians decided, you know what, we can't be asked anymore, to hell with this, let's just hit the snake at the head. So they subsequently targeted Pakistani air bases from where these attacks were being launched. Then on the night of 9th May at 2000 hours, the Pakistanis launched a third wave of attacks, which continued until 1:30 a.m. on 10th May. This wave was even larger than the previous ones and focused exclusively on air stations and nearby S-400 batteries, with Adampur, Srinagar and Kutch being particularly targeted. In addition to drones of various types and artillery rockets, air power was used much more intensively, including F-16s and JF-17s, tasked with delivering medium and long-range air-to-ground munitions. The Pakistani Air Force claimed to have achieved a major success that night by neutralizing Indian air defense systems through cyber attacks and electronic jamming. What is more, its kamikaze drones and long-range munitions delivered by fighter aircraft reportedly grounded Indian aircraft after striking 34 targets across Indian air stations. So according to the Indian Air Force, however, this third wave proved as ineffective as previous ones, with most drones shot down by anti-aircraft artillery or neutralized by jamming systems, and the remainder engaged by short and medium-range surface-to-air missiles. The S-400 batteries reportedly continued to keep enemy fighters at a distance, with none able to enter the engagement envelope of the medium-range missile systems, and the two CM-400 AKG missiles reportedly inflicted no significant damage on Adampur's S-400 battery. Furthermore, the S-400 systems not only restricted the freedom of action of the opposing air force, but also, according to the Indian Air Force, also shot down 5 F-16 and JF-17 fighters between 7th and 10th May 2025, and this despite regional Pakistani civil air traffic continuing as normal, which considerably complicated Indian operations. The report goes further to say that the Indians detected preparations for Pakistani attack scheduled on the evening of May 9th and opted for a quasi-immediate counterstrike. As soon as the Pakistani action had concluded between 2 and 5 a.m. on the 10th of May, the Indian Air Force conducted a series of strikes using BrahMos, Scalp EG and Rampage missiles launched from within Indian airspace by Su-30s, Jaguars and Rafales. The missile struck several sites up to 200 kilometers inside Pakistan territory, including 1 surface-to-air missile battery and 5 air bases. In North Pakistan, Nur Khan Air Base near Islamabad was hit by at least 1 missile.
भाईजान नूर खान बेस में आके गिरा है ये अटैक हुआ है नूर खान बेस पे बिल्कुल घर के सामने अभी एक जहाज गुजरा है और ये नूर खान बेस के ऊपर अटैक हुआ है
which destroyed a Pakistan Air Force Command and Control Center, while Murid Air Base, the hub of Pakistan's mail drone fleet, saw several hangars housing drones and a couple control center struck. In central Pakistan, the small Rahim Yar Khan Air Base sustained several missile impacts on its runway, while the civilian airport terminal, which reportedly hosted a drone control center, was also severely damaged. Rafiki Air Base was also targeted, though the Indian side did not disclose specific objectives or damage inflicted. Finally, in the south, a hangar that housed drones and a radar at Sukur Air Base were struck. After having detected preparations for a Pakistan Air Force counterstrike, the Indian Air Force launched a second wave of attacks at 10 o'clock on 10th May, which employed the same munitions and same tactics, but this time extending their target to manned aircraft, whereas the previous night strikes had mostly been restricted to drones and their support infrastructure. In central Pakistan, Sargodha Air Base, home to multiple combat squadrons, was rendered inoperative by several missile impacts at the intersection of its runway. Indian strikes were even more destructive in the south. At Jacobabad Air Base, an F-16 maintenance hangar suffered a direct hit, while a radar was also damaged or destroyed along with electrical and cooling facilities. At Bolari Air Base, another hangar housing 1 or more ARI aircraft was severely damaged. In total, the Indian Air Force assessed that at least 4 or 5 F-16s, 1 ARI, 1 C-130 transport aircraft, several mail drones, 2 radars, 2 command and control centers, and 1 surface-to-air missile battery had been destroyed on the ground, at the cost of roughly 50 long-range munitions. The Pakistan Air Force, however, subsequently reported that the area hit at Bolari was only lightly damaged and was quickly repaired, though 5 personnel were killed in the strike. Nevertheless, by noon on 10th May, Pakistan military authorities requested a ceasefire from their Indian counterparts. This was quickly accepted as the political objectives to the military, namely to conduct spectacular retaliatory strikes to deter JEM and LET, while countering the Pakistan military's response, had been achieved. New Delhi thus claimed to have brought this conflict to a close, whereas other powers repeatedly get bogged down in the conflicts they initiate. So basically they're saying the Indians got fed up of this back and forth and they decided it was time to take the gloves off. They hit the Pakistani air bases, they hit their command and control centers in the north, in the south, using BrahMos missiles, tactical missiles, and they struck at the heart of Pakistan's Air Force. And by the morning of the 10th of May, the Pakistanis had realized that this was only going to escalate and it would have been far worse for them. So they asked for a ceasefire. The Indians, having said that they achieved their objectives by targeting JM and LET bases, as well as targeting the bases from which Pakistan had now decided to retaliate and up the ante, they decided they had achieved their objective and they said, yeah, let's go for a ceasefire, where other countries would have continued. And then from that you have, Donald Trump going out and saying, well, he stopped 10 wars. There's one thing you need to understand. India has always said that its internal problems are its own to deal with. Jammu and Kashmir is its own internal issues and it will deal with it in this way. Have a look at Sri Iyer's channel called P Gurus and General Ravi Shankar's channel called Gunner's Shot, where the two are discussing on both their channels via a video link about the Indian government's abrogation of Article 370, and there was a bit of apprehension in India as to what the Islamic world would say about this. And the first voice coming out was that of the UAE, and how the UAE set the tone for what was meant to follow. Because the UAE subsequently said, Jammu and Kashmir is India's internal problem and it's to be dealt with internally. The only idiot in this entire Jammu and Kashmir issue is always Turkey's Erdogan. This clown is something spectacular. You know, he fails to remember that when the earthquake hit Turkey, the first personnel on the ground were Indian. The first help, humanitarian aid, came from India. But he continuously, perpetuates this like a snake with two heads. It's not only against India. He plays the Russians against the Ukrainians. He plays Europe against the Americans. If there's one guy who's mastered the art, along with the Pakistanis, of sitting on the fence and tilting to whichever way the wind blows, is Erdogan. Because he wakes up in the morning and he's pro-American. And by the end of the day, he's pro-Chinese. He wants to revive this Ottoman Caliphate and the old days of the Ottoman Empire. The economy has crashed. It's only slightly better than the Pakistani economy, which is, they're forever begging for money. I suppose, when you have internal problems, it's easier to highlight external ones, other people's problems, because then it takes the eye off your incapabilities. He's a really bad actor on the world stage. I understand perfectly well why the Israelis do not want Turkish troops on the ground in Gaza. It doesn't make sense. Not while Erdogan is heading a country. He's taking Turkey away from the model that Mustafa Kemal Ataturk had implemented in Turkey, and he's moving towards a more radicalized policy. I don't understand why he would do that, because he's doing it at the expense of his people and his economy. Anyway, I digress. What they say is that the UAE, what Sri Ayaz says is that the UAE were the first voice from within the Islamic Ummah that came out and said it's India's internal policy and for them to deal with as they see fit. And basically that shut down all the debate. So the Pakistanis were put in a dilemma, because they obviously always want to go and claim the Kashmir issue and this and I'm going to do an episode on the Kashmir issue, because I think it's important for everybody to understand what, there's this common misconception that Kashmir only exists from the time of Islamic conquests in India. Nothing happened before that. There were nobody living there before that. The Kashmiri Pandits are totally irrelevant in this matter. So I think it's an important issue that I'm going to bring up in a future episode, and I would like you to see an interview that I flagged in one of my other videos up, which I'll put up here, where this Kashmiri Muslim lady, Miss Malik, talks about how they as Muslims themselves were on the receiving end of this Wahhabism that had come in. Don't forget, Pakistan started embracing Wahhabism when Zia-ul Haq was in there. There's another Mad Hatter that was just put. Pakistan seems to have this affinity for bringing in either mentally unstable or delusional people into power in their military, and they then go and oppress the people. They have these delusions of grandeur. And I don't know, rather than looking after your people, educating, making sure education is good, making sure there's food for them, making sure they are looked after, you will rather sacrifice all that just to appease your own ego. I don't understand it. And not to mention the amount of thieving that goes on. There's a common joke that when the IMF give the Pakistani government a bailout, the price of property in the United Kingdom and the United States goes up. Why? Because they steal that money and the elites use it to buy properties all over. They keep their people in abject poverty, and they insist on this war, this fictitious war that they keep on. They start this war with all their terrorist proxies. and they allow it to fester. And, it's so sad because look at India, and Pakistan has the capability to become this great nation as well. They cut from the same cloth. Yet they keep using this sick, distorted inversion of what their religion actually is, just to rally the people. And it's really sad. It's really sad when this kind of thing happens, because it doesn't bode well not only for them but for the entire world, because Pakistan exports this terror network all over the world. So they hold the whole world ransom. First it was nuclears, we have nuclears, and the Indians have now said, well, take your nuclears, stuff it where the sun doesn't shine, because we will still hit you with or without your nuclears assets. So that's now become irrelevant. Now they hold the world at ransom by exporting their terrorist proxies all over. And it's insane. But anyway, yeah, we'll do a video on Kashmir so you understand what exactly is happening, because pro-Pakistani and all these people that go out there forwarding this narrative that Kashmir belongs to Pakistan, it's all a load of bullshit. Go and do the history. Pre-Islamic invasion of India, Kashmir was inhabited by the Kashmiri Pandits. They've been living there for centuries. Listen to Miss Malik, and she'll tell about what she has to say about the waves of genocide committed against these people. Nobody worries. Nobody worries because it doesn't fit the narrative. For Henry Kissinger and Nixon, it was important to allow the massacre of the Bangladeshis, because Pakistan was the conduit between China and the United States at a time when they wanted to drive a wedge between the USSR and China. The report concludes by saying Operation Sindoor marked a significant evolution in Indian counter-terrorism doctrine, which now equates a terrorist attack to an act of war warranting a decisive response. So you've seen that. And you've heard President Modi say, it's over. You attack us and we will respond and we will hit you hard. And I think to some extent they seem to be adopting a lot of the Israeli model, which is, you cannot be living in a place where your neighbors terrorize you and you sit there and accept it. I think if this is the way people want to behave, hit them hard, let them feel it, and keep hitting them until they do not have the capability to even flinch anymore. You have to be hard. You have to strike this kind of vermin in that manner, because otherwise you are not going to live in peace. You are not going to have peace. If your neighbor doesn't want to get on with you peacefully, that's fine. That's one thing. But if your neighbor wants to continuously inflict harm on you, I think at some point you need to say to your neighbor, listen, mate, that's it. Now we're going to teach you a lesson. And you teach your neighbor a lesson, and you continuously teach your neighbor a lesson until they understand that this policy does not work and we have to refrain from it. And you'll be doing generations and the world a favor. So thank you for taking your time to spend with us on this episode. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And I humbly request that you like, share, and subscribe to our channel so that it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.